For 3 years, every single night at exactly 10:47 p.m., a black man in a chef's coat walked out the back door of a billionaire's mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, carrying 2 large insulated bags. He never told anyone where he was going. He never asked permission. He never left a single receipt. And inside those bags was food that, by law, belonged to the richest man in that zip code. Warren Ashford, a private equity manager worth $2.3 billion. For 1,095 nights, no one noticed. Not the security team, not the housekeeping staff, not Warren himself, who barely came home before midnight. Until one Tuesday in November, when a broken sprinkler flooded the wine cellar, and Warren Ashford came home early. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the security footage. And what he saw on that screen made him sit perfectly still for 4 full hours. Before he did something no one saw coming. My name is not important. What matters is that this story is about 2 men who lived under the same roof, but in 2 completely different worlds. And about the night one of them finally crossed the line between them. Warren Ashford was 58 years old, and he had not laughed out loud in 1,247 days. He counted them, though he would never admit it. His wife, Eleanor, died on a Thursday in April, 3 years and 4 months ago, and something inside him closed like a bank vault the day they lowered her into the ground. He still went to work. He still made billions of dollars for people who already had billions of dollars. He still ate breakfast at 6:15, took his calls at 6:30, and arrived at his Park Avenue office by 7:45 sharp. But he did not live. He performed the shape of a life. His son, Terrence, had not called in 11 months. His friends had stopped inviting him to things after the 2nd year. And the 27-room mansion in Greenwich, the one Eleanor had picked out because she said the garden reminded her of her mother's house in Alabama, was so quiet that Warren sometimes turned on 3 televisions at once just to remember what sound felt like. The only person who saw Warren every day was his private chef, Darnell Baker. Darnell was 34 years old, 6'2", with hands that had been burned so many times the scars looked like a map. He had been trained at the Culinary Institute of America on a scholarship his mother worked 3 jobs to help him keep. She had a saying, his mother. She used to whisper it while she cooked collard greens in a kitchen too small for the family it fed. She would say, "Baby, food is how you tell somebody they matter. When you can't say the words, you put them on a plate." Darnell had come to work for the Ashfords 8 years ago, back when Eleanor was still alive and the house still laughed. She had hired him personally after tasting his shrimp and grits at a charity gala. Eleanor had cried at the table. She had said, "Young man, this tastes like being loved." And she had offered him the job before dessert. For 5 years, Darnell cooked for a family. For the last 3, he cooked for one man who barely ate. Every night, Warren would order a full 4-course meal. His doctor had told him to eat properly, and Warren Ashford did not disobey doctors, lawyers, or the SEC. And every night, Darnell would prepare it exactly as instructed. Roasted duck, braised short ribs, pan-seared halibut with lemon beurre blanc, rack of lamb with rosemary jus. Enough food to feed 6 people. And every night, Warren would eat exactly 7 bites, set his fork down, thank Darnell, and walk upstairs to his study. 7 bites. Darnell counted them, once, twice, 100 times. 7 bites out of a plate that cost more to produce than most families in Bridgeport spent on groceries in a week. The first night Darnell took the leftovers, it was an accident. He had been driving home to his apartment in Bridgeport, 36 minutes south, in a neighborhood Warren Ashford had probably never entered. And he had passed Grace Community Church on Fairfield Avenue. It was raining, cold, and there was a line outside the church door. 20, maybe 30 people, waiting in the rain for a meal that a woman named Reverend Thelma Hayes had been serving for 22 years. Darnell had 2 insulated bags of untouched braised short ribs in his back seat. He was going to throw them in his own trash, because that was the rule. Ashford's food went in Ashford's kitchen, or Ashford's trash. Never anywhere else. That was in his employment contract, page 14, section 3.2. But he was tired, and he was angry. And that night, he did something that would change 300 lives before it was over. He pulled into the church parking lot. He got out. He walked up to a black woman in her 60s wearing a purple raincoat and a name tag that said Reverend Thelma. And he said, "Ma'am, I've got food. It's good food. Nobody's touched it. Can I feed some people tonight?" Reverend Thelma looked at him. She looked at the bags. She looked at the line of hungry, wet, exhausted people behind her. And she said the words that Darnell would remember for the rest of his life. She said, "Son, when God sends help, I don't question the delivery method. Get inside." That first night, Darnell fed 34 people. He did not sleep afterward. He drove home to his apartment on Wood Avenue, sat at his kitchen table in his chef's whites, and stared at the wall for 2 hours. He kept seeing the face of a man named Curtis Freeman, a Vietnam veteran, 71 years old, who had eaten Warren Ashford's leftover braised short ribs like it was the first real meal he'd had in a month. And it probably was. Curtis had looked at Darnell with tears in his eyes and said, "Young man, what is this?" And Darnell had said, "It's short ribs, sir." And Curtis had said, "No, son, what is this? Because this ain't food. This is somebody telling me I still matter. Food is how you tell somebody they matter." His mother's words, coming back to him in the mouth of a stranger. The next night, Darnell prepared Warren's dinner exactly as ordered. Pan-seared duck breast with cherry reduction, wild rice pilaf, roasted asparagus, and a chocolate soufflé. Warren ate his 7 bites. Warren went upstairs, and Darnell, instead of scraping the plates into the compost bin the way Ashford's kitchen manual demanded on page 22, quietly transferred everything into 2 insulated bags, walked out the back door at 10:47 p.m., and drove 36 minutes to Grace Community Church. Reverend Thelma was waiting on the steps, as if she had known he would come back. The 3rd night, he brought bags again. The 4th night. The 5th. By the end of the 1st month, Darnell had a system. He would cook enough for Warren's official dinner, plus a test batch that he would claim was for quality control. The Ashford kitchen budget was so large that no one ever questioned an extra $180 a night in ingredients. And every night, at exactly 10:47, Darnell walked out that back door. He never once considered that a camera was watching him do it. Meanwhile, at Grace Community Church, something was beginning to change. Reverend Thelma had been running her feeding program for 22 years on donations of expired bread, dented cans, and whatever the local food bank could spare. Suddenly, her guests were eating filet mignon, duck confit, lobster bisque, miso-glazed black cod. Word spread. Not on social media. Reverend Thelma was very careful about that. But the way news travels among people who have been forgotten. In shelters, on benches, in the parking lots behind gas stations. There is a church on Fairfield Avenue where a black chef in a white coat brings the food that rich people don't eat, and he serves it to you like you're the guest of honor at a wedding. By the 6th month, the line outside Grace Community Church stretched 3 blocks on the coldest nights. By the first year, Reverend Thelma had trained 4 volunteers, converted the church basement into a proper dining hall, and installed real ceramic plates because, as she said, the good Lord did not send us duck confit to eat off styrofoam. By the 2nd year, Darnell had a small notebook he kept in his glove compartment. In it, he wrote down the names of every person he served: Curtis Freeman, Maya Johnson, DeAndre Collins, Kesha Watts, Reggie, the veteran with the missing thumb, Little Miss Ruth, who wore a different church hat every Wednesday, Big Anthony, who used to work at the shipyard before it closed in 1998. 273 names by the end of year 2. 273 people who thought Warren Ashford was feeding them. 273 people who had no idea that Warren Ashford didn't even know they existed. And then, one Thursday in October of the 3rd year, Kesha Watts almost died. Kesha was 29 years old. She had been homeless for 2 years, since the night her boyfriend broke 3 of her ribs and she chose sleeping in a laundromat over sleeping in her own apartment. She was smart. She was funny. She had gone to community college for 1 semester before life ran her over. And when Darnell first met her, she was so thin that he could see the shape of her collarbone through her t-shirt. For 8 months, Kesha ate Darnell's food. For 8 months, she gained weight. She started sleeping through the night, and she started smiling. And then, on that Thursday, she showed up at the church with a black eye, a split lip, and a story about a man in a shelter who had cornered her the night before. Darnell served her that night. He put an extra piece of chicken on her plate. He asked her, very quietly, if she needed help. And she said, "Chef, I just need to feel like a person again. Just for 1 hour. Can you let me eat like a person?" He said, yes. He walked to his car that night with tears streaming down his face. He sat in the driver's seat in the church parking lot for 20 minutes before he could turn the key. And he made a decision. He was going to ask Warren Ashford for a job for Kesha Watts. He was going to walk into that mansion the next morning, tell his employer the truth, and beg him. Beg the man who ate 7 bites of a $400 dinner to hire a homeless woman as a kitchen assistant. He never got the chance, because the sprinkler in the wine cellar broke that same night. Warren Ashford came home at 8:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, which was 3 hours and 31 minutes earlier than usual. His head of household staff, a stiff British man named Mr. Pemberton, met him at the door with the tight expression of a man who had bad news to deliver. "Sir, we have a situation in the East Wing. A sprinkler head in the wine cellar has failed. We estimate approximately 400 bottles have been compromised." Warren nodded once. He walked past Pemberton without a word. He did not go to the wine cellar. He did not care about 400 bottles of wine. He cared about the fact that he was home. And home meant silence. And silence meant remembering Eleanor. He went to his study. He poured a scotch. He turned on his laptop. And because he did not want to think about his dead wife, he opened the mansion's security system, a habit he had developed over the last year, watching the footage of empty hallways, because empty hallways were easier to look at than empty chairs at dinner tables. He clicked on the kitchen camera. He was, in truth, just looking for something to occupy his mind. He expected to see Darnell prepping the next morning's breakfast. Instead, he saw Darnell packing food into 2 large insulated bags. Warren watched. He set down his scotch. He watched Darnell wrap the duck breast, the same duck breast Warren had taken 7 bites of 90 minutes earlier, in a piece of parchment paper, place it in a food-safe container, seal it, and slide it into the bag. He watched Darnell add the rice, the asparagus, the soufflé, carefully so it wouldn't collapse. Warren watched Darnell zip the bags, put on his coat, and walk out the back door at 10:47 p.m. Then Warren did something he had never done in 3 years. He rewound the footage. He watched the night before. Same thing. He rewound again. The night before that. Same thing. He rewound 1 week, 1 month, 6 months. Every single night at 10:47 p.m., Darnell Baker walked out the back door of Warren Ashford's mansion, carrying food that legally belonged to Warren Ashford. Warren sat in his chair for 4 hours. He did not move. He did not blink. He did not touch the scotch. He simply sat there, and his mind, the mind that had earned him $2.3 billion by seeing patterns no one else saw, began to calculate. First, the legal angle. This was theft. Under Connecticut state law, this was theft of property from an employer. He could press charges. Darnell would face up to 5 years in prison. He would certainly lose his job, his professional reputation, and his ability to work in any high-end kitchen in the country. Warren's attorney, Gregory Banks, would have the paperwork drawn up by lunchtime tomorrow. Second, the financial angle. 3 years times 365 nights times an estimated $180 a night in food value. That was approximately $197,100. Not a large sum for Warren, but a very meaningful sum for a criminal restitution case. Third, the reputational angle. If this got out, a private chef stealing from his billionaire employer, it would be embarrassing. It would suggest Warren didn't know what was happening in his own house. It would suggest he was a fool. Fourth, and here Warren stopped calculating, because a fourth question had entered his mind, and it would not leave. Where was Darnell taking the food? Warren had assumed, for the first 3 hours, that Darnell was taking the food home to his own family. Maybe he had a wife, kids, in-laws. It would still be theft, but it would be understandable theft. The kind of theft a man could quietly fire someone for, without pressing charges, without making a scene. But then Warren pulled Darnell's employment file. He read it carefully. Darnell Baker, 34, unmarried, no children, lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport. No dependents, no family in the state. So where was he going with the food? Warren picked up his phone. He called his head of security, a former Secret Service agent named Miguel Reyes. He said, "Miguel, I need you to track Darnell's car for the next 3 nights, just his route. I don't want him followed. I don't want him approached. I just want to know where he goes at 10:47 p.m. Miguel said, "Yes, sir. Any particular reason?" Warren said, "I want to understand something." For the next 3 nights, Warren watched the security footage in real time, and Miguel reported back. Darnell drove the same route every night. I-95 South, 22 miles, exit 27, right onto Fairfield Avenue, into the parking lot of a small stone church called Grace Community Church. He stayed for approximately 2 hours each night. He came home at 1:14 a.m. Warren stopped calculating altogether after Miguel's second report. Because on the third night, he did something that Warren Ashford, the man who had not attended a Christmas party in 3 years, who had not visited a friend's home in 5 years, who had not entered a place of worship since Eleanor's funeral, did something impossible. He got in his own car. He drove himself for the first time in a decade. And on that cold Friday night in November, at 10:47 p.m., Warren Ashford followed his private chef down I-95. He was about to see something that would break him and rebuild him. Warren parked across the street from Grace Community Church, in the shadow of a closed laundromat. The rain had started around 9 p.m. and had not stopped. He watched from his car, a black BMW 7 Series that cost more than most of the houses on that block, as Darnell Baker got out of a used Toyota Camry, opened the trunk, pulled out 2 insulated bags, and walked up the church steps. There was a line of people waiting for him. Warren counted 43 heads. Men, women, 2 children. An elderly woman in a wheelchair being pushed by a teenage boy. A man in a wheelchair pushing himself. A young woman with a baby on her hip. Every single one of them, black or brown, or the pale gray of people who had been cold for too long. Every single one of them wet from the rain. Every single one of them watching Darnell walk up those steps like he was the sunrise. Warren watched Darnell hug an older black woman in a purple raincoat. He watched them disappear inside. For 20 minutes, Warren sat in his car and did nothing. Then, without deciding to, he got out. He walked across the street. He walked up the steps. He did not know what he was going to do. He did not know what he was going to say. He was a man who prepared for every meeting 3 days in advance, and he was walking into a church basement at 11:07 p.m. in the rain, with no plan and no words. He opened the door. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Roasted duck, rosemary, something baking. The smell of his own dinner from earlier that night, magnified, warmed, full of steam and butter and the noise of people eating. The second thing that hit him was the sound. Laughter. Actual laughter. A man at a table telling a joke, and 3 people slapping the table because it was funny. A little girl in a pink sweater asking for more mashed potatoes. Someone playing a soft old gospel song on a small speaker in the corner. A woman saying grace out loud over her plate before she picked up her fork. The third thing that hit him was Reverend Thelma Hayes. She was standing at the entrance to the dining hall, arms crossed, watching him. She was in her mid-60s, 5'3", with steel gray hair pulled back, and eyes that had seen every kind of man walk through that door. Warren, in his $4,000 overcoat and his handmade Italian shoes, was not a new species to her. She said, "Can I help you, sir?" Warren opened his mouth. No sound came out. She said, more gently, "Are you here to eat? Because you are welcome. But we ask everyone to sit down and take a plate, no matter what they're wearing." Warren said, in a voice that did not sound like his own, I'm looking for someone." She said, "There are 83 people in this room, sir. You'll have to be more specific." He said, "Darnell. Darnell Baker." Reverend Thelma's expression changed then, not to alarm, to something more careful. She said, "May I ask who you are?" He said, "I'm his employer." There was a very long pause. She said, "Ah." She turned her head slightly. She caught Darnell's eye across the room. Darnell, who was at that moment leaning down to serve a plate of duck to Curtis Freeman, the Vietnam veteran, and who looked up in that instant and saw Warren Ashford standing in the doorway of a homeless dinner in a soaking wet overcoat. Darnell froze. The serving spoon in his hand shook once and then went still. He set it down very carefully on the edge of the tray. He straightened up, and he walked across the dining hall toward his employer, past 43 people who did not yet know that the man in the doorway was the reason they were eating. Darnell stopped 3 feet from Warren. He said, "Mr. Ashford." Warren said nothing. Darnell said, "Sir, Warren said, "How long?" Darnell said, 3 years, sir." "How much?" "Every night, sir, whatever you didn't eat." "How many people?" Darnell swallowed. He looked at the room. He looked back at Warren. He said, "Tonight?" 83. "Total, over 3 years?" "I've served 9,482 plates, sir. I keep count. My mama taught me to count everything I cook." Warren stared at him. 9,482 plates. Warren had, that same 3-year period, eaten approximately 2,190 plates, 7 bites at a time. He had wasted, in his own kitchen, enough food to feed a small town. Reverend Thelma stepped forward. She said, "Sir, whatever this man has done, he has done it in the name of God's people. Before you say anything, I want you to look at that table. Because that boy in the pink sweater right there, his name is Marcus. He is 9 years old. 2 years ago, when his mother came here for the first time, he weighed 41 pounds. Do you know what a 9-year-old is supposed to weigh, sir?" Warren did not answer. "About 65, she said. "Marcus weighs 62 now. He is almost a normal weight. Because for 2 years he has eaten your chef's food." Warren looked at Marcus. Marcus was laughing at something the woman across from him had said. Warren felt something break inside him that he had not felt break since Eleanor died. He said, very quietly, "May I sit down?" Reverend Thelma said, "Son, in this church, you never have to ask." The Reckoning. From the church basement to the naming of Ashford Kitchen. Warren Ashford sat at a folding table with a plastic tablecloth for 3 hours and 47 minutes. He did not eat. Reverend Thelma brought him a plate, his own duck breast, warmed, and he stared at it, and he could not bring the fork to his mouth. Darnell sat across from him and did not speak. The 2 men, employer and employee, watched a dining hall full of people eat dinner. Curtis Freeman, the Vietnam veteran, came over at one point. He did not know who Warren was. He simply said, "You look like you had a long day, brother. Ain't no shame in a long day. Eat something." And he patted Warren's shoulder and moved on. Little Marcus, the 9-year-old in the pink sweater, came by holding a paper napkin folded into what he claimed was a swan. He offered it to Warren. He said, "Mister, you look sad. This is a good luck swan. I made it.
You can have it."
Warren took the napkin swan in his hand. He held it very carefully. He did not put it down for the rest of the night. Maya Johnson, a woman in her 40s who had been living in her car since her factory closed, told Warren a joke about seagulls that made him laugh out loud for the first time in 1,247 days. Warren's own laugh startled him. He looked around as if to see who had made that sound. Kesha Watts, the same Kesha with the black eye, did not come to Warren's table. She stayed on the far side of the room, watching, cautious the way animals are cautious. Darnell noticed. He did not push it. Around 12:30 a.m., the room began to empty. People thanked Darnell on the way out. Some hugged him. Some hugged Reverend Thelma. A man Warren did not know shook Warren's hand and said, "Bless you, brother, for whatever brought you here tonight." Warren did not have the strength to explain that nothing good had brought him there, that he had come to fire the man who was feeding these people. When the last plate was cleared, Reverend Thelma sat down across from Warren. Darnell sat next to her, and Reverend Thelma folded her hands on the table and said, "All right, Mr. Ashford, now we can talk." Warren said, "How did you know my name?" She said, "Sir, this is a small county, and Darnell told me 3 years ago whose kitchen he was borrowing from. He asked me that first week if it was wrong, and I told him it was not wrong, but that he should be prepared one day to answer for it." Warren looked at Darnell. He said, "You told her?" Darnell said, "I couldn't lie to a preacher, sir. I lied to you every night, but I couldn't lie to her." Warren felt the corner of his mouth move. Almost a smile. Almost. He said, "Do you know what I do for a living, Reverend?" She said, "I know you have money." He said, "I have $2,300,000,000. I have 12 people who work only to manage my calendar. I have a wine cellar with a broken sprinkler that has flooded 400 bottles of wine tonight. And I have not thought about those bottles once since I walked in this door." He said, "For 3 years, my chef has been feeding your church out of my kitchen, and I did not notice. Do you understand what that means?" She waited. He said, "It means I have been throwing away enough food every single night to feed 83 people. And I never asked where it was going. I assumed it went in the trash. That was fine with me. I have been throwing away entire lives, Reverend, and I did not even lift my head." He looked at Darnell. He said, "You should have told me." Darnell said, "Sir, with respect, if I had come to you 3 years ago and asked to donate your leftover food to a homeless shelter, what would you have said?" Warren opened his mouth. He closed it. He thought about the version of himself from 3 years ago. The version who had just buried his wife. The version who was already dead inside. The version who would have said, "Absolutely not. That is a liability issue. Do you know what happens if one of them gets sick and sues? Do you have any idea how that story plays in the press?" He said, out loud, "I would have said no." Darnell said, "Yes, sir, I know." Warren looked at the empty tables. He looked at the wooden cross on the back wall. He looked at the napkin swan in his own hand. He said, "How much would it cost to run this? Legally, officially, with food safety inspectors and refrigerated trucks and lawyers and insurance?" How much to do this correctly, so that no one goes to prison and no one gets sick? Reverend Thelma said, "Sir?" Darnell said, "Sir?" Warren said, "I asked a question. How much?" Reverend Thelma exchanged a look with Darnell. She said, "Mr. Ashford, are you asking me how much it would cost to make Darnell's crime into an operation?" Warren said, "I am asking you how much it would cost to fix the fact that I have been an idiot for 3 years." There was a very long silence. Reverend Thelma said, "Well, son, that is a much better question. And I think we should start by naming the thing. Because if we're going to build it, we ought to give it a name." Warren looked at her. Then he looked at the napkin swan in his hand. He said, "My wife's name was Eleanor. She would have loved this place. Would it be all right if we named it after her mother?" Reverend Thelma said, "What was her mother's name?" Warren said, "Ashford. It was her married name, but she went by Mama Ashford to everyone who knew her. She fed half of Selma, Alabama out of a 2-bedroom house in the 1960s. She fed civil rights workers. She fed freedom riders. She fed anyone who was hungry. My wife told me the story 100 times." Reverend Thelma said, "Then let's call it Ashford Kitchen." Darnell said, "Sir?" Warren said, "Get me my lawyer on the phone in the morning. And get me the number of every restaurant in Fairfield County. We are going to change how this county throws away food." Darnell said, "Yes, sir." Warren said, "And Darnell?" "Sir? You are no longer my private chef. You are the culinary director of Ashford Kitchen. Your salary just tripled, and you will hire your own staff. And you will hire them from this room." Darnell did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was rough. He said, "My mother would have liked you, sir." Warren said, "I doubt that, but maybe she would have liked who I become." At 6:15 a.m. the next morning, Warren Ashford ate breakfast for the first time in 3 years. Not 7 bites. All of it. 2 scrambled eggs, a piece of toast, a small bowl of berries, and a cup of coffee. Darnell watched from the kitchen doorway, half afraid the man was going to change his mind about everything he had said the night before. Warren did not change his mind. At 6:32, he called his attorney, Gregory Banks. Gregory answered on the first ring, because when Warren Ashford called at 6:32 a.m., you answered. Warren said, "Gregory, good morning. I need you to look up something for me. A federal statute called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act." There was a pause. Gregory said, "The what?" "The Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, 1996. It protects businesses that donate food to nonprofits from civil and criminal liability, provided the food is donated in good faith and meets safety standards. I want to know exactly what it covers, what the state of Connecticut adds on top of it, and how to structure a nonprofit food donation operation that involves multiple high-end restaurants." Gregory said, "Warren, what is this about?" Warren said, "This is about the rest of my life, Gregory. Draft the paperwork by Friday." Gregory said, "Yes, sir." At 7:15, Warren called his son Terrence in Los Angeles. Terrence did not answer. It was 4:15 a.m. in California. Warren left a voicemail. He said, "Terrence, it's your father. I know I have not been a good father in a very long time. I'm calling because I would like to see you. I am starting something. I would like your advice on it. If you would call me back at any hour, I would be grateful. I love you, son. I have not said that out loud in a long time. I love you. He hung up. He sat in his study and cried for 11 minutes. Then he got up, straightened his tie, and started making phone calls. By 10 a.m., Warren Ashford had spoken with the owners of 8 of the top restaurants in Fairfield County. He knew all of them personally. He had eaten at their establishments. He had invested in some of them. He said the same thing to each of them. He said, "I am starting a legal, insured, professionally operated food donation program called Ashford Kitchen. I am funding it entirely for the first 3 years. I need your surplus food. Not scraps, not garbage. Real, plated, uneaten food from your walk-ins at the end of the night. My chef will pick it up. My insurance will cover it. My lawyers will paper it. Your name goes on the wall. Your PR person will thank me. Are you in?" 7 of the 8 said yes on the spot. The 8th said he had to talk to his lawyer and then called back at 2 p.m. and said yes. By 11 a.m., Warren had leased a 12,000-square-foot commercial kitchen in Bridgeport, 3 blocks from Grace Community Church. He had done it over the phone. The lease agent had said, "Sir, would you like to see the property first?" And Warren had said, "No, I've already seen everything I need to see." By 1 p.m., he had hired a food safety consultant, a health department liaison, and an operations manager who would run the school nutrition program for the entire Bridgeport public school system for 15 years before retiring. By 3 p.m., Darnell was in Warren's study, sitting in a leather chair that cost more than his monthly rent, being handed a folder. Darnell opened it. Inside was an employment contract that made him the founding culinary director of the Ashford Kitchen, at a salary of $195,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a signing bonus, plus authority to hire 12 staff members within the first 90 days. Darnell looked up. He said, "Sir, I stole from you for 3 years." Warren said, "You did." Darnell said, "And now you're paying me almost triple my old salary." Warren said, "Yes." Darnell said, "Sir, respectfully, this does not compute." Warren leaned back in his chair. He said, "Darnell, I have been in business for 36 years. I have hired hundreds of people. 90% of them were technically qualified for their jobs. Maybe 10% were the kind of person I would trust to make decisions when I wasn't in the room. And out of 36 years, I have met exactly 3 people who I would trust to do the right thing even if it cost them their job. You are one of those 3. He paused. You did steal from me. You broke my trust. And you did it because you saw something that was wrong and you tried to fix it. The way you went about it was wrong, but at least you went about it. He paused again. There is nothing more valuable to a man in my position, Darnell, than an employee who will do the right thing when I am not watching. You have proven for 3 years that you are that man. I would be a fool to fire you. I have been a fool for long enough. Sign the papers." Darnell signed the papers. Then he walked out to his old Toyota Camry in the driveway, sat in the driver's seat, and called his mother in Georgia. He said, "Mama, you'll never believe what just happened." His mother, who had been cooking eggs at that very moment, sat down on her kitchen stool. She said, "Baby, tell me." He told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Darnell, when I told you that food is how you tell somebody they matter, I meant the people you feed. But baby, sometimes it's the person doing the cooking who needs to be told too.
That man just told you that you matter. Don't waste it.
Darnell did not waste it. The first person Darnell hired was Kesha Watts. She was 29 years old, 5'4", with a black eye that was starting to yellow and a distrust of everyone in a suit that had been earned over 2 decades of hard living. When Darnell called her over to a corner of the church basement 3 nights after Warren's visit, she thought she was in trouble. She thought maybe Darnell had heard about the fight at the shelter and had decided she was too much trouble to keep feeding. Darnell said, "Kesha, sit down." She sat. He said, "How much did you weigh 6 months ago?" She said, "I don't know. 97 pounds, maybe?" "How much do you weigh now?" 118. "Do you know why?" "Because you feed me." He said, "Kesha, I have a job for you, if you want it. 40 hours a week, $52,000 a year, plus health insurance. Kitchen assistant. You'll be prepping food for the same people you eat with every night. And in 6 months, if you want to move up, we'll pay for you to finish your culinary certification at Norwalk Community College." Kesha did not speak. She looked at him. She looked at the table. She looked back at him. She said in a voice so small Darnell almost did not hear it, "Chef, I have been arrested twice. I have a domestic violence protective order against my ex. I don't have a permanent address. I don't have a car. I don't have anything to wear to a job interview. Why would you hire me?" Darnell said, "Because 2 years ago you weighed 97 pounds and you were still standing in line here to eat. Which means you have more strength than most CEOs I've ever met. Because I have watched you learn every person's name in this dining hall inside of 8 weeks. Because Reverend Thelma says you are the smartest person she has ever met who does not yet know that she is smart. And because I need somebody who will look at the plate in front of them and understand what a plate can mean to a person." Kesha started to cry. She did not sob. She just cried. Silently. The way people cry when they have been holding it for years. She said, "Chef, if I say yes, I'm going to work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I need you to know that. I'm going to work so hard, you'll get tired of watching me work." Darnell said, "Kesha, that's the whole idea." She said yes. The next day, Warren Ashford personally paid the deposit and first 3 months of rent on a small 1-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood 6 blocks from the new Ashford kitchen. Kesha Watts had her own front door for the first time in 26 months.
She sat on the empty floor of her empty apartment that first night and slept there because she did not yet own a bed. In the morning, she went to work at 5 a.m. The second person Darnell hired was DeAndre Collins. DeAndre was 37 years old. He had done 4 years in Cheshire Correctional Institution for aggravated assault, a conviction he did not dispute. He had gotten into a bar fight in his 20s and had put a man in the hospital. He had been out for 5 years. He had applied for 172 jobs. He had gotten 3 interviews. He had received 0 offers. He had been eating at Grace Community Church for 11 months. DeAndre could cook. He had learned in the prison kitchen, which, as he told Darnell, was in fact an actual culinary program run by a former sous chef who had been convicted of tax fraud. DeAndre had gotten his food handler's card in prison. He had gotten his ServSafe certification in prison. He had 8 years of professional kitchen experience if you counted the 4 in Cheshire, which most employers did not. Darnell counted it. He hired DeAndre as a line cook at $58,000 a year.
DeAndre did not cry. DeAndre stood up, shook Darnell's hand, and said, "Chef, respectfully, I don't say thank you until I earn it. Ask me again in 6 months." Darnell said, "Fair enough." In 6 months, DeAndre would run the Ashford kitchen dinner service like a Marine drill instructor with a soft heart. He would hire and mentor 2 other men with records. He would eventually be promoted to sous chef. And on his 1-year anniversary at the Ashford kitchen, he would walk into Darnell's office, sit down, and say, "Chef, I said I'd say thank you when I earned it. I earned it." And then he would say, "Thank you." By day 90, Darnell had hired 12 staff members. Every single one of them came from the dining hall at Grace Community Church. 2 were formerly homeless. 3 had felony convictions. 2 were single mothers who had aged out of the foster care system. 1 was a Vietnam veteran named Curtis Freeman, who was hired as the kitchen's morning receiving manager because, as Darnell told Warren, Curtis has been getting up before dawn since 1971. He knows how to check a delivery. 1 was a young man named Terrell, who had been kicked out of his family's home at 17 for being gay, and who had been living on the streets for 4 years. 1 was a 62-year-old woman named Miss Ruth, who was hired as the dining hall greeter because Miss Ruth had a way of making people feel welcome that could not be taught in any school. The health department showed up on day 14. They stayed for 6 hours. They wrote 17 violations. They shut down half the kitchen. Darnell called Warren from the parking lot. He said, "Sir, we have a problem." Warren said, "Darnell, we do not have a problem. We have a project. Meet me at the office in an hour." 6 weeks after the Ashford kitchen officially opened its doors, an article appeared on the front page of the Connecticut Post. The headline read, "Billionaire's charity kitchen hires felons to serve homeless. Is Bridgeport safe?" The article was fair, technically. It quoted Warren Ashford accurately. It quoted Darnell Baker accurately. It quoted Reverend Thelma Hayes accurately. But it also quoted 3 people who had never set foot in the kitchen. A city council member with political ambitions, a restaurant owner 3 blocks away who had not been asked to donate, and a concerned citizen who turned out to be the ex-boyfriend of a woman Warren had helped Darnell hire. The article had photographs. It had the mugshots of 2 of Darnell's kitchen staff, pulled from public records. It had the address of the Ashford kitchen. It had, at the bottom, a link to an online comment section, which within 48 hours had accumulated 1,847 comments, most of which were exactly as ugly as Warren had feared they would be. Gregory Banks, Warren's attorney, called Warren at 6:04 a.m. on the day the article ran. He said, "Warren, this is bad." Warren said, "Gregory, get out here. Bring a communications strategist." By 9 a.m., Warren was sitting in the Ashford kitchen dining room, which was not yet open to the public that day, surrounded by his legal team, his newly hired PR firm, Reverend Thelma, Darnell, and a very calm 44-year-old woman named Priya Ramaswamy, who had been the crisis communications lead for a Fortune 100 company for 11 years. Priya read the article aloud. She let it sit in the room. Then she said, "Mr. Ashford, there are 3 ways to handle this. 1. Statement of denial, quiet retreat. Restructure the kitchen so no one with a record is customer-facing. 2. Aggressive legal response. Sue the paper for defamation. Drown them in lawyers. 3. Transparency campaign. Invite the paper in. Let them film the kitchen. Let them meet the staff. Let the story tell itself." Warren said, "Which one works?" Priya said, 3. But 3 requires courage from your staff. It requires them to speak on camera about their pasts, and that is a lot to ask. Warren looked at Darnell. Darnell looked at Reverend Thelma. Reverend Thelma looked at the room. She said, "I'll ask the staff, but I already know the answer. These people have been invisible their whole lives. You think they're afraid of a camera?" She was right. Every single staff member said yes. The Connecticut Post came back 3 days later, this time with a different reporter. A young black woman named Alicia Freeman, who, as it turned out, was the granddaughter of Curtis Freeman, the Vietnam veteran who now managed the kitchen's morning receiving. Alicia spent an entire day in the kitchen. She interviewed every staff member. She interviewed the homeless guests. She interviewed Reverend Thelma. She interviewed Warren. The second article ran a week later. The headline read, "The People Behind Ashford Kitchen. What I Found When I Finally Walked In." The article was 3,000 words long. It ran on the front page. It quoted DeAndre Collins saying, "I did 4 years. I did every single day of those 4 years. I served my sentence, and when I got out, this country served me another one. A life sentence of being invisible to every employer I applied to." Chef Darnell was the first man who read my resume all the way to the bottom before he made up his mind about me. That is all I ever wanted. Just for somebody to read the whole thing. It quoted Kesha Watts saying, "I spent 2 years being invisible. Nobody saw me. Nobody needed me." Then Darnell put a knife in my hand and told me he needed 40 servings of collard greens by 5 o'clock. I did not feel saved. I felt needed. Those are two different things. Being needed is what saves a person. It quoted Warren Ashford saying, "I have spent 20 years building things that make money. I want to build one thing that makes sense." It quoted Reverend Thelma saying, "You want to fix the system? Start by trusting the people. And you want to know if it's safe to hire a man who has been to prison? Ask yourself, sir, whether it's safe to leave him with nowhere to go." The comments section on that article was different. Within 3 days, the Ashford Kitchen had received 240 applications from other restaurants in the state that wanted to donate food. Within a week, the mayor of Bridgeport had visited the kitchen personally and had eaten lunch with Curtis Freeman. Within 2 weeks, 3 Fortune 500 companies had reached out to Warren about starting Ashford Kitchen programs in their own cities. The city council member who had criticized the kitchen in the first article quietly lost his re-election bid 6 months later. The restaurant owner 3 blocks away, who had complained that the Ashford Kitchen was hurting his business, went out of business within 18 months. Not because of the Ashford Kitchen, but because his food was mediocre and his service was cold, and the community had noticed. And the ex-boyfriend of the woman Warren had helped hire, he showed up at the Ashford Kitchen one night, drunk, angry, looking for her. DeAndre Collins met him at the door. DeAndre did not touch him. DeAndre said, "Brother, this is a kitchen. This is not a place for what you brought here. You need to leave. And you need to know that everyone in this kitchen sees you, and we will remember your face." The man left. He never came back. DeAndre later told Kesha, "I meant every word. I didn't need to hit him. He already knew." Warren Ashford's son, Terrence, called him back 31 days after the voicemail. Terrence was 34 years old, a venture capital partner at a firm in Santa Monica, and he had not been in his father's house in 4 years. He had been 11 years old when his mother Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer. He had been 15 when she died. He had watched his father, in the years after, become a man Terrence did not recognize. A man who worked until midnight, who forgot birthdays, who once, on Christmas Eve, had taken a call from Tokyo during dinner and not come back to the table. Terence had built his life at a very deliberate distance from that man. But the voicemail had rattled him. For 31 days, he listened to it in his car. He listened to it in his kitchen. He listened to it once at 3 a.m., alone in his condo overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And he heard something in his father's voice that had not been there in 20 years. A crack. A softness. Something that sounded like his mother's husband, and not like the man his mother had died and left behind. On the 31st day, Terence called. Warren picked up on the first ring. Terence said, "Dad?" Warren said, "Terence." There was a long silence. Terence said, "Are you okay?" Warren said, "Son, I am not okay. But I am becoming okay. Would you fly out and see me? I want to show you something." Terence said, "When?" Warren said, "This weekend if you can. Any weekend. I will send the plane." Terence said, "Dad, I have my own money. I can buy my own ticket." Warren laughed. Actually laughed. He said, "Son, forgive me. Old habits. Please come. When you can." Terence came the next Friday. Warren picked him up from the airport himself, driving his own car, the BMW, not one of the driven ones. Terence got in the passenger seat. He looked at his father for a long moment. Warren had lost weight. Warren was wearing a sweater, not a suit. Warren's face was tired but present, in a way Terence had not seen since he was a boy. Warren said, "How was your flight?" Terence said, "It was fine." "Dad, where are we going?" Warren said, "I'm taking you to work." He drove Terence to the Ashford kitchen. He parked in front. He said, "Wait here for 1 minute." He got out. He walked around to the passenger side. He opened the door for his son, the way he had once opened the car door for his wife. He said, "Terence, there is a woman inside named Reverend Thelma Hayes. She is going to give you a plate of food. You do not have to eat it. I want you to sit at the table. I want you to look at the people who eat here. I want you to listen. That is all I am asking. 2 hours. Then I will drive you back to my house, and you can go home if you want to, or you can stay for the weekend. Either way, I love you. I have not said that to you in this many years, and I am not going to stop saying it now that I have started." Terence went inside. He sat at a table for 2 hours. He met Curtis Freeman, who told him about the war. He met little Marcus, who was now 11 and who wanted to be a chef when he grew up. He met Kesha Watts, who was training to be a sous chef and who at that point had gained 30 pounds and lost 20 years of fear. He met DeAndre Collins, who did not smile easily, but who shook Terence's hand with both of his and said, "Your father is a good man." I know that is not what everybody would say about him, but it is what I would say. Warren sat next to his son the whole time. He did not talk. He let the people talk. When the 2 hours were up, Terence looked at his father. His eyes were red. He said, "Dad, why didn't you tell me about this on the voicemail?" Warren said, "Because I did not want you to fly out here for the story. I wanted you to fly out here for me. If I had told you, you would have come for a good cause. I needed you to come for your father." Terence said, "That was cruel." Warren said, "Was it?" Terence said, "Yes, and also, thank you for being cruel." They sat there for a long moment. Terence said, "Dad, I want to help." Warren said, "You already have. You showed up." Terrence said, "No, I want to help build this. I have a network on the West Coast, restaurants in LA, tech companies with campus dining budgets that are wasting food on a scale that would horrify you. If we scale this, if we franchise the model, we could open Ashford kitchens in 12 cities within 3 years." Warren looked at his son. Warren had, for 4 years, been trying to reconnect with Terrence through birthday cards, awkward phone calls, and holiday texts that went unanswered. He had, for 4 years, failed. He had accidentally succeeded, by feeding 40 homeless people in a church basement, in bringing his son back to his own dinner table. Warren said, "Son, I would be honored." Terrence stayed the whole weekend. They did not talk about Eleanor. They did not need to. She was in every plate of food in that kitchen. She was in the reason Warren had built it. She was in the reason her son had come home. On Sunday night, Terrence flew back to Los Angeles. He resigned from his firm 3 months later. He opened the West Coast headquarters of Ashford Kitchen in Oakland 6 months after that. The Ashford Kitchen almost died in year 2. Not because of the press, not because of the health department, not because of protesters, of which there were a handful, briefly, and none of whom lasted more than a week once the community showed up to counter-protest. It almost died because of a single decision Warren Ashford made in month 14. He decided to expand too fast. Buoyed by Terrence's enthusiasm, and by 3 offers of matching funds from major foundations, Warren agreed to open 5 new Ashford kitchens simultaneously: Hartford, New Haven, Newark, Yonkers, and Providence, with a target opening date of Thanksgiving. Darnell warned him. Darnell said, "Sir, we do not have the staff. We do not have the systems. We do not have 5 Reverend Thelmas. This kitchen works because Reverend Thelma has been running that church for 22 years, and every single person in that dining hall knows her name. You cannot copy that. You have to grow it." Warren said, "Darnell, we have the money. We have the model. We have the demand. If we don't move now, someone else will." Darnell said, "Sir, nobody else is going to move. This is not a market. This is a mission. And missions grow by roots, not by capital." Warren said, "Darnell, I hear you. But my son has just come home, and I am going to build the biggest damn food rescue operation in the Northeast, and I am going to build it in the next 12 months. And you are going to help me." Darnell said, "Yes, sir." 6 months later, 3 of the 5 new kitchens were failing. Hartford had opened without a proper community partner. It was serving 80 meals a night to people who did not trust the operation, in a building that looked like a corporate cafeteria. Newark had opened in the wrong neighborhood, technically closer to homeless populations, but the local church leaders had not been consulted, and word had spread that the White Money Kitchen had come to town. Providence had opened well, but had lost its culinary director to burnout inside of 4 months. More importantly, back in Bridgeport, the original kitchen, the flagship, the heart, was struggling. Darnell was spending 3 days a week traveling between the 5 sites. Kesha, who had been promoted to Bridgeport's kitchen manager, was doing the work of 3 people. Curtis Freeman had been quietly hospitalized for exhaustion. Miss Ruth had told Darnell, gently, that if the founder didn't come back and eat lunch with the guests at least once a week, these folks are going to forget that this place has a soul. Warren was in Los Angeles, meeting with tech investors, when Darnell called him. Darnell said, "Sir, I need you to come home. Now. Not tomorrow. Now." Warren said, "Darnell, I have 3 meetings this afternoon that could—" Darnell said, "Sir, if you do not come home tonight, I will resign in the morning." Warren was on the plane 4 hours later. He landed at Westchester Airport at 11:47 p.m. Darnell was waiting for him on the tarmac. Warren got in the passenger seat. Darnell drove him straight to the Bridgeport kitchen. He did not speak the entire drive. At the kitchen, at 12:34 a.m., Darnell walked Warren into the empty dining hall. He turned on one light. He sat Warren down at a table, and he laid out 3 folders. He said, "Sir, Hartford is losing $400,000 a quarter, and it is not feeding anyone we couldn't have fed better through an existing local nonprofit. Newark is a disaster. Providence lost its director because we did not build a bench. Meanwhile, Bridgeport, the place that started this, has had staff turnover in the last 2 months of 9 people. 9. We had 0 turnover in the first 14 months. 0. Now we've lost 9. Warren said, "Darnell." Darnell said, "Sir, I am not finished." Darnell said, "Sir, you built this because you wanted to build something that made sense. Right now, we are building something that makes headlines. Those are 2 different things. I love you like a father, sir. I have said that once, and I will say it again if I have to. But if we do not stop growing, we are going to lose the soul of what we are. And if we lose the soul, none of the money matters. Nothing we build after that will feed anybody." Warren sat there. He looked at the empty dining hall. He looked at the wall where the photographs of the staff hung. Every staff member of the Bridgeport kitchen, in a chef's coat, smiling. He looked at Kesha's photograph, at DeAndre's, at Miss Ruth's. He looked at Curtis Freeman's and remembered that Curtis had been hospitalized last week. He said out loud, "Oh God." He said, "I did the thing again." Darnell said, "Sir?" Warren said, "For 30 years, Darnell, I built companies, and every single time I optimized for scale. Faster, bigger, more. It was the only way I knew how to build. And I just did it again. To the one thing in my life that was actually about people." He put his head in his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Then he sat up. He wiped his face. He said, "Darnell, what do we do?" Darnell said, "We close Hartford. We close Newark. We save Providence by giving it away. Hand it to a local nonprofit for $1, take our name off, and just fund it as a donor. We pause New Haven and Yonkers until we have properly trained leaders for them. And you and I go back to Bridgeport full-time for a year. We rebuild the roots," Warren said. "That is going to cost me $18 million in unrecoverable costs. And it is going to be a public embarrassment." Darnell said, "Yes, sir." Warren said, "Do it." Darnell said, "Yes, sir." The press coverage of the closures was brutal for exactly 1 news cycle. "Billionaire's food charity collapses in 3 cities," ran one headline. "Warren Ashford's experiment fails," ran another. A cable news segment ran a graphic of Warren's face over the words, "Good intentions, bad management." Warren watched the segment. He was sitting in the Bridgeport kitchen at the time, at a table, eating lunch with Miss Ruth and a man named Reggie. He did not react to the TV. Miss Ruth reached over and turned it off. She said, "Baby,
Don't you worry about that. Nobody in this room watches that channel.
Reggie said, "Some of us can't afford cable anyway." Everyone at the table laughed. Warren laughed the loudest. Warren gave one interview about the closures. It was a 2-hour sit-down with Alicia Freeman, Curtis's granddaughter, the same reporter who had turned the original bad story into the story that had launched the kitchen. Alicia asked hard questions. Warren answered every one of them. She asked, "Mr. Ashford, some critics are saying this is proof that a billionaire's ego is not a substitute for community-based leadership. What do you say to that?" Warren said, "I say the critics are correct. My ego caused this. I saw a beautiful thing that my chef had built out of a church basement, and I tried to turn it into an empire. That was wrong. I have spent 30 years learning how to build empires. I am now learning, at 58 years old, how to build gardens instead. Gardens grow slowly. They grow from the ground up. They do not scale, but they last." She asked, "Do you regret starting this?" Warren said, "I regret nothing about starting this. I regret every decision I made in month 14. Those are two very different things." She asked, "What would you say to a billionaire who was thinking about doing what you did?" Warren said, "I would say, do not do what I did. Do not put your name on it. Do not scale it. Do not turn it into a brand. Find one Reverend Thelma in your own city. Find one Darnell Baker in your own kitchen. Fund them. Get out of the way. And eat with the people you are feeding at least once a week for the rest of your life. That is my advice." She asked, "Last question. When you sit at that table with those guests, do they know who you are?" Warren said, "Some of them do. Most of them don't. Miss Ruth over there calls me Warren. Reggie calls me the Sweater Man because I stopped wearing suits 3 months ago. Little Marcus calls me Mr. Warren. Curtis Freeman calls me brother sometimes, which is the highest honor I've received in my life, including the honorary doctorate I got from Yale." The article ran, "It was, in its way, the beginning of the second life of the Ashford kitchen." Over the next 18 months, the Bridgeport kitchen was carefully rebuilt. Darnell was full-time on site 5 days a week. Kesha Watts was promoted to sous chef and given a raise and 2 weeks of paid vacation, which she used to go visit her mother in South Carolina for the first time in 8 years. DeAndre Collins was promoted to chef de cuisine and given a stake in the kitchen's revenue. Curtis Freeman recovered from his hospitalization and returned to work part-time, at his own insistence, with strict orders from Reverend Thelma that he was not allowed to lift anything over 15 pounds. Curtis grumbled about this. Curtis did it anyway. Curtis was 68 years old and had been told by 3 different doctors that his heart could not take another Vietnam-level shift. Miss Ruth became the Director of Guest Experience, a title Darnell invented specifically for her, and which she wore on a small pin she had made herself in silver that said Director, because Miss Ruth said the rest of the words were too much fuss. Little Marcus, now 12, started an after-school program at the kitchen. 3 afternoons a week, he and 4 other kids from the neighborhood came in, put on aprons, and learned to cook. Kesha taught them. She was patient. She was funny. She was hard on them. She told them they were going to be chefs someday if they wanted to be. Marcus decided he wanted to be. The Providence Kitchen, given away for $1 to a local nonprofit called Hope on the Hill, thrived. The New Haven Kitchen,
restarted the following year under the direction of a Reverend Thelma-style community leader named Pastor Angela Barnett, thrived. The Yonkers Kitchen was eventually opened in year 3 under the leadership of a formerly homeless woman named Denise, who had spent 9 months training in Bridgeport and who, as Darnell would later say, understood the difference between running a kitchen and holding a room. Terrence Ashford, on the West Coast, took the same lessons to heart. The Oakland Kitchen grew slowly. He did not open a second West Coast site for 2 full years. When he did, it was in Fresno, and it was co-run by 2 women he had spent 18 months hiring and training. By year 5, there were 9 Ashford kitchens operating in the United States, all of them locally led. All of them funded, but not controlled, by the Ashford Foundation.
All of them, on average, staffed 70% by formerly homeless or formerly incarcerated employees. 0 of them had ever appeared in a scandal. Warren stopped counting them at 9. He said to Darnell one afternoon in Bridgeport, over a plate of Miss Ruth's collard greens, "Darnell, I used to count everything. Deals, millions, bites of food. I have stopped counting. Do you know what that means?" Darnell said, "It means you're free, sir." Warren said, "It means I'm alive." 5 years after Warren Ashford watched a security video of his private chef walking out the back door with 2 insulated bags, Curtis Freeman died. He was 76 years old. He died at home, in the small apartment the Ashford Foundation had helped him afford, of heart failure. He had spent his last morning at the Bridgeport kitchen. He had received a shipment of tomatoes at 6 a.m. He had checked them, signed the paperwork, and told the driver, who he had known for 4 years, a joke about seagulls. The same joke Maya Johnson had once told Warren on Warren's first night. Curtis went home for a nap that afternoon. He did not wake up. His funeral was held at Grace Community Church. Reverend Thelma preached. She was 70 years old now, and her voice was smaller, but her words were bigger. She said, "Curtis Freeman survived 2 tours in Vietnam, 30 years in factories, 20 years on the street, and 5 years of the best food anyone in this county has ever eaten. He did not die on any of those battlefields. He died in his own bed, in his own apartment, with a full belly and a Bible on his nightstand, and a photograph of his granddaughter on the wall. That is not a tragedy. That is a victory. That is what a life is supposed to look like at the end." She paused. She said, "Curtis used to say something to me. He would come into the church on Sunday mornings, because he did come to church, though he was not a talkative man about it. And he would sit in the back pew, and after the service he would come up to me and say, 'Reverend, I want to thank you for the food this week. I want to thank you for the job. I want to thank you for the apartment. But most of all, I want to thank you for seeing me. Because before you and Chef and Mr. Warren saw me, I had not been seen in 22 years." She said, "That is what this kitchen does. It sees people." She said, "That is what a plate of food is when it is served correctly. It is a way of saying, 'I see you. I know you're here. You matter.'" She said, "Curtis mattered." She said, "You all matter." She said, "Now let's eat." Because Curtis Freeman would have hated a funeral where nobody ate. They ate in the church basement, all of them.